Good morning. This morning we have a wonderful chance to hear one really great speaker. I think it's Victor Kipiani, and he's the chair of a Georgian think tank, which is called GeoCase. And Victor's interests include not only IR and security or governance issues, but particularly are focused more on Georgian foreign policy and Georgian security policy and the impact of geopolitical trends on Georgian security and foreign policy. And I must also remind that Mr. Kipiani is an author of a number of great articles and surveys done on the topics of domestic and foreign policy, as well as Georgian legal system and many others. So I hope you will have a lot of questions in order to get know more about Georgian contemporary foreign and security policy and other issues which might be interesting for you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kipiani, for agreeing to give this lecture this morning. And floor is yours.
My pleasure indeed. My pleasure indeed. Thank you for your kind words and thank you for this very nice introduction. Definitely, I'm not sure how all comprehensive my presentation would be, but what I promise to speak in a very genuine way, addressing that vacuum of the information which we've touched on, which still unfortunately exists in terms of grasping the essentials of Georgian domestic politics, which is so strongly related to the foreign policy. So I will just highlight a few aspects which I think would be very much important to bring to your audience. And as we've said, our scheduled timeline is to fit into the 1 hour time framework. So I will take some time to reflect on various points, and then if that would be followed by Q&A, that would be just great. So please don't shy to raise as thorny issues as you can, because, well, again, with appreciation that there is some disconnect in terms of information, some speculations or some gossips or misunderstandings. We'll do our best to fill that within this hour, and we'll do our best with my esteemed colleague to do in aftermath of this conversation. So Georgian foreign policy, let's start with this very awkward question which we hear these days very often. Is Georgia's foreign policy became anti-Western and pro-Russian? So I'm starting, with the most delicate and the most painful question. I think, either composition is wrong. Of course, the Georgian foreign policy did not become any anti-Western and any pro-Russian. I would say the Georgian foreign policies, as we call it, became more with Georgian contents. And that is what makes it different from foreign policy trajectory, which we have been pursuing in the past. We all see how this world is changing. We all see how much ambivalence is taking place. We all know that how much I personally dislike this word. Transactionality has been brought into various foreign policy agendas. But we should, if you step yourself into the shoes of the country, which is in very volatile region, and unfortunately, South Caucasus still remain the volatile region, very much in the flux. We are sort of geopolitically sandwiched at the crosswinds of various malign geopolitical influences and forces, and that of course has its own impacts on trying to build up a well-balanced, rational, and pragmatic foreign policy. Two dominant factors which have direct impacts is the Western security environment in the Black Sea region, especially in the context of Ukraine, of the war in Ukraine, And the second major factor is ongoing occupation, Russian occupation of big chunks of Georgian territory, and the creeping annexation. I should remind you, my dear fellow students, fellow colleagues, that the occupation has not stopped in a way that the creeping annexation goes on. And unfortunately, we don't have much reliance on international law and international mechanics to stop that creeping annexation, and that poses really a big challenge for Georgia, especially when seeing into the eyes of the reality, when the major force, the dominant force, occupies and continues occupying nearly 20% of Georgian territory. So those two challenges, the war in Ukraine, with big uncertainties for how long that war would continue, what would be an end result, what would be sort of, the specific terms and conditions of either of an armistice or a political settlement. And as we say, either war eventually ends up either in a ceasefire agreement or in a political settlement. So we don't know for sure, what would be those terms and conditions. And I should be also very honest with you that if we agree on saying that an end of the war in Ukraine would signal a new Iron Curtain in Europe, we were not 100% sure on which side of an Iron Curtain we would stay and we would remain. And it's not because our absence of our willingness or our dedication to the pro-Western course. It's just because of the fact that, unfortunately, in this world, in absence of strong international mechanics, small states have a lesser voice and lesser influence to predetermine an outcome of political impasse or military conflicts. Nevertheless, Georgia is pursuing its foreign policy course. I would bring to your attention a few pillars of Georgian foreign policy. One pillar is continuing its integration with the European Union, and the second pillar continuing its integration with NATO. Let me stop, for a while on either of them. With European Union, you're well aware that at some point when the associated trio has been set up, with Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia signing the associated trio agreement, and we, as the front runners of the Eastern Partnership, have agreed to pursue membership of the European Union based on our joint efforts. Then the war in Ukraine has broke out, and that has caused certain divergence, to put this in a way. And that divergence was followed up by a decision of the European Commission, whereby Ukraine and Moldova were granted the candidacy status. And as for Georgia, Georgia was granted the so-called European perspective. So the status lessened and the status of candidacy. Of course, that caused frustration and disappointment, and rightly so, because based on many surveys and the number of reports, based on various benchmarks and assessments, we've been doing much better than Moldova, and we're not doing any less better than Ukraine. So that caused, also certain speculations, rumors, which I would not be delving into for the sake of keeping an accuracy of my narrative and trying to be as professional as possible. But nevertheless, of course, that was disappointing. At this point in time, we're pursuing, let's put it this way, the second try. And that second try so far seems to be fairly successful. A week ago, or nearly 10 days ago, we got an assessment by the European Union on the progress of sectoral reforms. Same was happened with Ukraine and Moldova, and based on the scores which we have received, we have reasonable grounds of cautious optimism that by the fall of this year, Georgia will also or would also be granted the candidacy status. Actually, based on those assessments, again, we're much ahead of Moldova, and we're slightly behind of Ukraine. And when I'm saying that we're slightly behind of Ukraine, that's predominantly in the fields of security, defense, and foreign policy. Again, it was appreciation in how much difficult geopolitical situation Ukraine is. Actually, Ukraine is engaged in a full-fledged war. Again, we treat that difference with complete understanding. But in overall, as I've said, that assessments of secular reforms provide with extra layer of optimism, and I think that has been a good litmus test as well, to prove that Georgian democracy, although not perfect, of course, and far from being perfect and ideal, still doing not bad enough, especially when we compare it with our peer countries like Ukraine and Moldova. So we're expecting that the progress would reflect into that very important political decision. The existing instruments of Georgia being connected with the European Union are the association agreements and deep and free comprehensive trade agreement, which provides with various political and economical instruments. It's also a visa-free regime, which we are enjoying for many reasons: personal visits, studying abroad, or tourism, etc., etc. So that's where we are in terms of our integration with European Union. European Union, which became more vocal over the last period of time, and that vocality is already reflected in several major projects which would be running and would be engaging Georgia and would be engaging other regions in the region. Those are, to name but few, are the Black Sea electricity cable, a really big project where EU has committed to invest more than 2 billion euro, and that would definitely transform the security environments and domestic landscape as well, not in Georgia, but across the region. That's one major project. The second project, if you had, it's the so-called Middle Corridor. That is also the project which does not have just economic flavor, but has geopolitical flavor as well. It's about shipping goods from Asia, predominantly from China. As we know, the so-called Belt and Road Initiative has different ramifications, so the Middle Road is one of them. Middle Road, which was a bit disadvantageous before the war has started in Ukraine when compared with the Northern Route. The Northern Route, which starts in China and runs across Russia, but for obvious reasons, sanctions, etc., etc., so Russia fell out of global economic structure, and the Northern Route has effectively been blocked. And the Southern Route, which runs across Iran, and we are all familiar with Iranian problems facing sanctions, and the second problem which contributed to impasse on the southern direction was about Taliban coming to the power in Afghanistan. So actually, the Middle Corridor suddenly has got enormous advantage, and we definitely are very much committed to exploit that advantage to the best of our interests. As we're saying, this is historical momentum, and we definitely are not going to let that historical momentum passing by without tangible, clear, and meaningful results. And the last project, which I should also mention, it's building up the nuclear deep-sea waterboard, which would be an extension of the middle corridor, and which would have enormous impact, not just on Georgian economy, but on the landlocked countries, including Azerbaijan and Central Asian countries. So, dear colleagues, I'm again, I'm trying, to touch on the sort of, principle, the points, just to give you an overall feeling what where we are and what's happening on our side. And that was briefly on EU's issue and on integration of Georgia with European Union institutions. As with NATO, we are beating around the bush, frankly speaking, with NATO integration, although there are various instruments in place, political and defense. At some point, we signed a substantial package of cooperation with NATO. That substantial package of cooperation has been reshuffled, and we have a renewed substantial package of cooperation, which practically provides for all practicalities or practical instruments of cooperating with NATO. So what about the status? I think, that's where we need a clear response from our NATO colleagues. We have some sort of, twists, or I would say ups and downs in this history. Sometimes those ups and downs are not very much clear to us. And the latest development is that in course of the latest NATO summit in Madrid, the NATO communique says the following, that Georgia would become, or will become, a member of NATO, like Ukraine, by the way, through the membership action plan. My personal opinion, I should be very honest with you, that that addition, saying that Georgia will become a member of NATO, provided, however, that we would undergo the membership action plan, is a bit to put it mildly, not quite understandable, because again, we have all the practicalities, all the leverages in place. And I'm always questioning, what that membership action plan means in fact, actually. I kindly remind you that the membership action plan was enacted back in 1999, when we had completely different security environments. The world has changed since then. If you look into the membership action plan, it's lacking, for clear criteria. What that plan is, what are those benchmarks in politics or defense or economy which Georgia is supposed to meet, provided again that in facts and actually, all those instrumentalities are in the place. And probably I was not very much diplomatic when that communique has been issued. My first reaction on Georgian TV, I said that by introducing that caveat or that provision, NATO is sort of, making us to sitting in the waiting room for indefinite time. Probably it's not extremely precise and very accurate statement, but again, that makes that feeling that with NATO integration, we are beating around the bush when the security environments in the Black Sea dictates more bold actions and more courage on the NATO side. Integration with NATO or integration with European Union is always a two-way street. Georgia is doing all it could do, punching above its weight, suffering in pain, blood, all type of efforts. And we definitely expect, that when we walk our leg of that street, a second leg, a remaining leg of the street would be walked by our NATO partners or EU partners. So that is very important, especially in the situation of the flux which was created in Georgia, and that flux is very much exploited by Russian malign influence, hybrid war, and disinformation. When any message of hesitation or any action of hesitation by NATO or by you is interpreted in the way of Russian disinformation war. So I think that regardless of number of pitfalls which Georgian democracy suffers or institutional framework suffers, we are well to expect more tangibility by NATO, and where we have to expect more visibility and more courage and more decisiveness when we speak about the actions by on the way of European integration. And this is very important because it's another side of the coin which our colleagues in the West are not discussing frequently enough. But I think, that another side of the coin should equally be discussed along, with the Georgian side of the coin, to put this in a way. So that is sort of, my take on NATO integration, which we could elaborate more, if you wish, in the context of your questions. And the next major point in my discussion is the region itself. Unfortunately, South Caucasus, which became associated with wars, turbulences, civil conflicts, we definitely tried to contribute to the peace and stability. The Georgian government has announced a major initiative in that respect, which is called the Georgia's Peaceful Neighborhood Initiative. We also hear sometimes, from time to time, some contradictory proposals or initiatives. I'm not sure if you had about 3+3. This is the major issue which is debated nowadays in Georgia. Georgia has not acceded to 3+3, effectively leaving it at a 3+2 platform. And the position by Georgian MFA, Minister of Foreign Affairs, has been very much explicit that sitting at the same table as Russians, while Russians are not respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity, and speaking with them on peace and stability, that would be quite odd and bizarre, to put it mildly. So 3+3 is sort of, type of initiative, regional initiative, which is not fully fledged yet, which provides, by Russian interpretation and interpretation from Iran, by the way, for participation of 3 South Caucasian nations, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, plus Turkey, Russia, and Iran. But the initiative at this point in the limbo, and Georgia has not, as I've said, acceded it formally for the reasons which I've just mentioned. Last but not least, Georgia is among those unique countries which has a clear provision in its constitution that our prime objective in terms of foreign policy and domestic policy is European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And all respective bodies are committed to strive to their best to contribute to that process of becoming a full member of Euro-Atlantic integration community. And the second sort of, the major pillar, major documents of Georgian foreign policy is the resolution which has been passed by the Parliament of Georgia, which provides for different objectives on international level, on regional level, etc., etc. And those objectives, of course, definitely set forth European and Euro-Atlantic integration as the priorities for Georgian foreign policy. Now, the question is, one side is a letter of the law, and another side is a spirit. And that's probably, something which I should also very honestly discuss with you, whether the letter of law and whether the spirit of law, spirit of actions, like, let me put it this way, always coincide with each other. And that's where we're getting to that type of vacuum of information, especially when it comes to our the well-esteemed colleagues in the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, when those nuances, those intricacies of Georgian foreign policy have not, from Georgian perspective, not only interpreted or not always well accepted. And that being said, we are in discussions, and I think we could say at this point that we're in discussions of providing with a better institutional platform of explaining what Georgian foreign policy and Georgian stance or various issues is, by hopefully initiating in the near future, we call it Georgia, Baltics, and Galling Dialogue platform. I think that would give us really unique opportunity on top of those efforts which respective stakeholders and officials are exercising from our side as a type of 1.5 track diplomacy to contribute to the better understanding. So this is probably sort of some highlights on major objectives. Some reminders as well on the specifics of Georgian keys. And I think, those specifics should be well taken into account when looked into our direction and making assessments and opining on the situation in Georgia and around Georgia. So that is where we are. So to sum up, the war in Ukraine would have a direct impact on Georgian foreign the sort of security position. When I speak about security position, I overlooked to mention our strategic partnership with United States of America. We have several fundamental documents in place. One is the Charter on Strategic Partnership, which is sort of the constitution of the bilateral relations, and another is Georgia Support Act, which provides for different ways or venues of supporting Georgian democracy, stability, and security by the United States. What we're expecting in the near future for that role to increase in the Black Sea region, we recognize that the United States is not Black Sea nation, but it could well become Black Sea power. We're very much in reliance also that the eastern flank of NATO would eliminate, certain asymmetry which exists between the northern end and the southern end. As to the northern end, NATO is present by the so-called enhanced forward presence. When it comes to the Black Sea, it's a bit of diminished quality of NATO presence through the so-called tailored forward presence. So we are appealing to our NATO colleagues to address, that disbalance, and in the context of the war in Ukraine, to introduce better resources, better capacity, to infuse more into the security of the Black Sea by economic means, by defense, security, and political actions as well. So I would rather stop here. I very much hope that I made myself clear enough what is my take personally and what is our take generally. So please feel free to go ahead with your questions. And as I said, I would try my best to respond in all my honesty. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. While students are considering their questions, I would like to ask regarding Georgia's vision on the region, because Ukraine is not only the painful issue in your region. Next to you, there is Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we see that there are two powerful forces kind of playing around. There is Iran, there is Russia, which are doing certain, let's say, type of proxy war. And NATO actually maybe is not involved directly, but we see that NATO is supporting Azerbaijan in a way that there are certain exercises planned for this year. Also, we see that there is Israel as a player in. So how does Georgia see this situation, and what is Georgia's position?
Georgia was put into a very peculiar position when the Second Nagorno-Karabakh war broke out. And there have been various speculations, frankly, which side Georgia was. Right at the outbreak of the hostilities, Georgian Security Council has made an official statement saying that we try to keep open relations with both countries. We are not party to the conflicts. We have two major minorities in Georgia, Azeris and Armenians, and that also sort of puts an extra responsibility on official Tbilisi. And we also propose to mediate. The mediation offer, for clear reasons, was a gesture of a goodwill by Georgians. It is not materialized. But still, that is the position, not to go into those complexities on either side. We, by Georgian foreign policy document, we have strategic partnership with Azerbaijan, and we have good neighborship relations with Armenia. So with Azerbaijan, the ranking is higher than with Armenia, and it has its own history. If we go back to the end of 90s, last century, and beginning of 20s, we all recall two major energy projects, which one is Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline, and the second is South Caucasus natural gas pipeline. And those two projects laid down the foundation of strategic partnership between two countries. And that partnership, of course, has its own very strong, as they've said, historical roots. As for the aftermath of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, we also see some differences in Baku's foreign policy. Baku, which has always been pursuing openly now the so-called multi-vector policy. But the difference as a result of ending the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, that Turkish presence in the region is becoming more and more visible. As we say, Turkey is back to the region after 100 years of absence. That definitely creates, quite an obstacle for Russia, which has always been treated the South Caucasus as its own backyard. So at this point of time, Russians are forced to divide, or to share, I would say, to share that influence with Turkey. Turkey's contribution into Azerbaijan's victory has been enormous, whereby Armenia's frustration with Russians has also been not less enormous. As you know, Armenia is a member of the so-called Collective Security Treaty. Regardless of the letter of that Collective Security Treaty, Russia has practically done nothing to stop aggression, to stop the war, to intervene on Armenia's side, I would say, in this way. And that definitely caused, some deep dissatisfaction in Yerevan. Whether that dissatisfaction would go in terms of disconnecting Armenia from Russian foreign policy orbit and turning Armenia more into pro-Western side, it remains to be seen. There are some indications, that certain changes could be taking place. We also noticed over the recent, in the last week, that there was a major move by Armenia toward Turkey, when Foreign Minister of Armenia has visited Turkey, and that was the first visit by Armenia high-ranking officials within, in the period of the last 30 years. This historically very painful issue of recognizing or not recognizing, as Armenians call it, Armenian genocide in Turkey. So those shifts would probably have a say on geopolitical landscape, with Russian influence being diminished, Turkish influence being on uphill, and the last the key remaining issue would be how the West would be reacting, either increasing its presence in the region or keeping it at the same level. So in this paradigm, Georgia will be trying, to balance as much as possible, not to get into trouble by provoking or instigating Russia. That is very much of high priority of Georgian foreign policy. something, which some people do accept domestically, something which do not treat, with complete understanding. But that's the foreign policy objective, to continue the Western integration without getting into yet another war with Russia. That is very important, because Georgia's concerns that regardless of the end of the war in Ukraine, if Russia wins, God save us from that, Russia's appetite for aggression toward the neighbors could increase. But there is also a fear on Georgian side: what happens if Russia loses? Would Russia try to compensate at the expense of other neighbors? So that's a quite a tricky situation. Something like catch-22. So we're not sure that as a result of ending the war in Ukraine, with one or another result, which way Russian foreign policy would take its course. And therefore, that cautious approach, that rationality, that pragmatism, which I mentioned at the start of our conversation, sometimes it contributes to the perception of the ambiguity of Georgian policies, ambiguity when it's judged, from abroad, and ambiguity, which we have to comment and to explain that's ambiguity, and that sort of alleged uncertainty is not because we're detracting from objectives we have stated, but because of the realities of the ground. And that is also very important for you to understand, because different from Georgia, of course, Latvia is also the neighbor country to Russia, but you are under the security umbrella of NATO. And if something wrong, let me speak in a very plain language. If something wrong happens in this country, any modern war, any modern combat would be completed here in 48, 72 hours maximum, with disastrous results for us. And there would be no one to come helping us immediately overnight. So I think, that reality, dear colleagues, should be taken well into account when we speak about cautious and up to some's mind, not enough courage or boldness in Georgian foreign policy. That is very important.
Thank you very much for your answer. We see already 3 hands raised up. Arturs, I think you were first, please.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for giving an insight on Georgia and its policies. During this lecture, I actually checked out the map and came to some conclusion that it could be one of the rare times I see a country in more dangerous region than Latvia is, not only regarding the NATO part of this. And my question is also regarding geography, but in a different way. In 1987, Morocco's application to the European Union was denied by EU because it was not considered a European country geographically. It was the only time such thing happened. Do you think Georgia's case could be similar, and that could be a reason why Moldova and Ukraine got EU candidate status and Georgia not?
I think that, thank you for your question. Well, of course, Morocco's case is all enough, to put it mildly, and it's completely different from Georgian case, not just because of geography, but European Union has also recognized on many instances that Georgia is a European nation by starting with initiation of the Eastern Platform, with Georgia being an active member of Eastern Partnership Platform, and ending up with the recent statement when European perspective has been granted to Georgia, and has been granted to Georgia as to the European nations. So actually, there should be no hesitations, among scholars or pundits, whether Georgia is a European or not. Of course, we're European. We're European by the nature of our history. We're European by the nature of belonging to the European civilization. And if you hear the Georgian discourse on NATO membership or EU membership, you will often hear the connotation that it's not about the NATO membership, it's not about EU membership on it in terms of its formality, but it's also about exercising our civilizational choice. So we are saying that getting back to Europe not culture-wise only, but politically wise or security-wise, is getting back to the roots of our civilization. So I think, this is the mindset of Georgians, but it's also the political declaration and political spirit of our European colleagues. So there should be no question, no doubts, no question marks on which side of geography or political geography or economical geography we are. We're clearly on the side of EU, we're clearly on the side of European policy and European political culture.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Arturs, your question, please.
Right. Thank you for the lecture and also for the insight of and I guess the very well argumented reasoning of the cautious approach that Georgia has taken. Meanwhile, there has been a recent comment by the UK Defense Secretary estimating that actually 97% of the whole of Russian army is currently deployed in Ukraine. And well, in light of that, isn't it? I guess my question would be: isn't that a bit of a window of opportunity at this point? Will there even be a better point to retaliate against Russia, even though the reasoning behind the cautious policies are understandable? At the same time, Russia is objectively very busy with Ukraine now. So how do you see that?
Yeah. Thank you for your question. Very pragmatic response from my side would be point number one, that if you compare our capacity with Russian capacities, still in the context of that comparison, retaliation is relying on retaliation, let's put it this way, it would be a very dangerous step. So we're excluding, any type of retaliation in that respect, and we're also excluding why. We're not talking about aliens in Georgia. We're talking about our own citizens, which are Abkhazians and Ossetians. We can't. Of course, I understand your question, and I fully respect your question. On the surface, it could be looking like retaliation, but we can't engage into yet another military conflict with our own citizens. It's not about. It's a different case. Russia has invaded different country, Ukraine. We can't invade, our own people or our own lands. We say that we are negating, we're reneging using the force, and that's been officially declared on many instances in the framework, in the context of United Nations, etc., that we will not be using any force against Ossetians and Abkhazians. Why? Because they are our nationals. They're our own people, and definitely you can't retake your own people, say that taking back them by using the force. Our prime policy is winning over their minds and winning over their hearts, if you wish, in this place. And in that respect, Georgia has been exercising the peaceful policy of reintegration. There have been specific programs in place which are to show an impact of Georgian soft power. If we are successful to build a true democracy on non-occupied part of Georgia, if we are successful enough to build resilient economy, if we're successful enough to move in the way of affording prosperity and well-being to Georgian citizens, that could be decisive, and that should be the most meaningful leverage for us getting our compatriots, our citizens, our nationals back into the orbit of Georgian state. So, and I think this is the wise policy, which came at costs. I should be very honest, because I think that we have committed a number of mistakes in the beginning of 90s, Of course, those mistakes were not committed just by Georgians. That those mistakes been instigated by Russia in the first place. But I think that we did our wrong, frankly speaking. And I think, based on those wrong track record, we came to the right conclusions. No more war, no more conflicts, no more military conflict, the standoff with your own citizens, which are Abkhazians and Ossetians. Just by peaceful means, by projecting your soft power, by projecting attractiveness of a Georgian state, that should be the key reliance point of reintegrating those territories. So that is my response to your question. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't talking obviously about taking back the regions or any military attack, but just in general being, I guess, somewhat bolder. In your stance against Russia, because because of the window of the opportunity here. But yes, I understand your reasoning.
I completely take your point, because when we speak about ending the war in Ukraine and hopefully ending with the result we all want to see, we clearly expect, that result, which we all wish for, would have a very strong impacts and direct impact on Russian presence on the Georgian occupied territory. So we very much hope that this impasse, this deadlock, would be opened, or would be addressed, or would be resolved as a result of successful, let's say, outcome of the war in Ukraine. If Russia's capacity would be diminished, if Russia's influence would be diminished, of course, that opens more opportunity for us, and that also provides with incentives to Abkhazians and Ossetians starting direct conversation with us about reintegrating and getting back. So at this point of time, we don't have any direct communication, we don't have any direct conversation, because actually, we have to speak with the occupying power, or we have to speak with no one else. So that is reality. And if that reality would be removed, if that someone in between who plays very malign role would be removed in one way or another, opening the direct channel of communication, of course, that would be a breakthrough in terms of addressing and resolving those conflicts.
Thank you very much for this detailed answer. I have additional question, since you quite much evaluated on Ossetians and Abkhazians. Are there any public opinion measurements, maybe, or you have certain maybe kind of insights on the certain tendencies? How do they react to war in Ukraine, or maybe there are some changes in public moods? We also remember about the passportization policies Russia used to use in 2008. So is there kind of any tendency that those citizens would like to change their citizenship, like, for example, because of mobilization or etc.? Are there any measurements or any insight on those topics?
Yes, but by the way, even before the war in Ukraine, specifically in case of Abkhazia, Sigeta, when there have been various legislative initiatives for let's say for Russians acquiring real estate in Abkhazia, some other issues. Abkhazia was very much resistant to those efforts, even taking into account the huge dominance which Russians are exercising over Abkhazians in the first instance, and Ossetians. Abkhazians been very bold enough not to be assimilated, not to be incorporated. From Georgian standpoint, this is a light of optimism. If they want to stay, to keep their identity, and for that identity not to go away through being absorbed by Russian Federation, of course, it still creates, some bridge of communication as well between us and them. Patients should understand that when we speak about keeping their identity, it's a much better chance to keep that identity, within Georgia than within Russian Federation. And this is very important message. We never stop continuing emphasizing this point, that regardless of that historical pain and wrongdoings from our side as well, we're still their natural ally, and we're one and the same. Because of course, Asians are much smaller nation than we, but we're also a small nation. So we understand what the reality of the world presents to us. What that means being surrounded by major powers. So again, when keeping their identity, when keeping their language, when keeping their culture, of course, we're in a better position to provide with respective safeguards than Russian Federation is able to do. It's a bit different case with Ossetia, the so-called South Ossetia. South Ossetia, while Abkhazia still keeps, tries to keep, that the semblance of autonomy, Ossetia, actually, South Ossetia, it's a big military base. So unfortunately, Ossetians living in the south, in the so-called South Ossetia, do not have as much say as Abkhazians have. So to combine my response and related to the previous question and response, of course, the war in Ukraine is not just about the war in Ukraine. It's about reshuffling this geopolitical vacuum, reshuffling, the composition of power, reshuffling the balance of powers. And we very much hope that reshuffling that balance of power would eventually reflect into addressing the conflicts in Georgia. The conflicts which, by the way, I should necessarily mention, of course, at the face value, those are the ethnic conflicts. But I'm never tried to repeat that essentially those are geopolitical conflicts. Those are not ethnic conflicts. Calling them the ethnic conflicts is about downgrading the genesis of those conflicts, because those conflicts have erupted, have instigated, and provoked as a result of our foreign policy choice. So this is very important. So essentially, I'm saying that, of course, with some ethnic components, but those are geopolitical conflicts, but not just ethnic conflicts. So yeah, that is probably to sum up, the response to your question.
Thank you very much. And now we have a question from Maris. Maris, please.
Hello, thank you very much for your lecture. My question is regarding a matter that is currently causing some tension between the EU and Georgia, namely the hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens that have emigrated into Georgia since the beginning of the war. And the question is, what do you think would be the best decision for Georgia regarding the status and integration of the Russian citizens who choose to stay in Georgia after the end of the war? Would it be keeping the regular naturalization and citizenship processes, expediting them, non-citizen passport system like we have in Latvia, or encouraging them to return to Russia, perhaps something else entirely?
Thank you for your question. The irony of Russian influx, that it's very interesting to know that they came to Georgia using the same way Russian tanks been using or rolling into Georgia back in 2008. So how history sometimes is just fair when with the passage of time it could address some questions, and it was really very unique that Russians pouring into Georgia using the same transport venues and transport routes Russian troops been using. And why I'm saying that? I'm saying that for the reason that don't misinterpret me, but by not denying access to Russian nationals in Georgia, Georgia as if showed its moral superiority. I really don't want to sound very pathetic, but again, making comparisons between Russian tanks as unwelcome guests, back in 2008, and Russian nationals fleeing their own country, their own regime, using the same way, and accepting them by not denying, we have reminded about our moral superiority. We reminded about those grave mistakes and violations which they have committed back into 2008, and which they're continuing committing by occupying Georgian territory. So there was no way, as a gesture of humanitarian support, to deny them access. Now, if any filters, if any security checks should be in place, I fully agree that with you that there should be some compliance set up, some security checks. Frankly, there is even varying statistics how much Russians are in the country. The latest report I saw in the Washington Post, which said that more than 100. Georgian officials saying that around 50,000. There are some other numbers who are mentioning the highly exaggerated number of around 250,000, etc., etc. So there is even no certainty, which means that there is no proper setup in place which would control inflow, exact numbers, and who is who. And of course, that relates to security concerns, and this is one of the hotly debated issues nowadays in Georgia, whether some security safeguard should be in place, whether we should reinstate the visa regime with Russia, and those are the open questions. If you ask me, there should be something in between. I don't think that we should deny access completely. More than that, I think that and probably this response would be very controversial, for any small nation to develop further, it has to have some external factor, some multicultural factor, but it depends, how big that factor is. We're a small nation, we have to preserve our own identity. Same time, we have our limits for capacity to grow. And those people who bring in, certain expertise, know-how, etc., as a human capital, those are very interesting for Georgian economy. They have contributed to the growth of Georgian economy over the last year. But of course, there should be some very cautious exercise. There should be some limits. And having just a completely open door policy, that is very concerning to me, and not just to me, but to many Georgians as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very open and honest answers, which gives a really good food for thought, including the policies of small countries. And indeed, it is very interesting to observe those new discussions within Russia's neighborhood countries. What does this migration flows will mean? Like, for example, Estonia also has announced that actually Ukrainian refugees are not a burden for the economy, but rather Ukrainians have given meaningful impact on the growth of Estonian economy. So those discussions definitely will continue. The same goes to the discussions regarding the geopolitical choices of Russia's neighbors and the further tactical steps in order how to react to disbalances in regions in general. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think we shouldn't say that this is kind of only one lecture or only one discussion. I think it's a very good start for further discussions, further lectures, in order to inform our societies more about Georgia in Latvia or Latvia in or tell about Latvian positions in Georgia or Baltic positions in Georgia, since indeed, as you started this lecture, we need to kind of fulfill the gaps in knowledge and to make better understanding of each other, so we can support each other in the future. But for today, I would like to say great thanks for your lecture and insights, and thanks to students for asking good questions and being good listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed, Sigita. Thank you for your personal efforts. Thank you to Latvian Transatlantic Organization to make this event happen. And thank you to our fellow colleagues. And yeah, you rightly pointed out, this is the first step in the context of our cooperation to address the knowledge gap or the informational gap. And we'll definitely in a position to continue in the same spirit, in the same vein. So thank you so much indeed. Again, my best wishes to Latvia and all the best of success to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And bye-bye.